Bun găsit, prieteni! Suntem în cadrul forumului Aspen GMS Security Forum 2024. Discutăm astăzi cu Elliot Gerson, vicepreședinte al Aspen, în contextul alegerilor care vor avea loc în Statele Unite. Elliot, hello.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Thank you for being here, Elliot. Will be crucial elections in United States, 5th of November. Remember the 5th of November. Will be a very close. We all expect it here in Romania to have a very close result. What do you think will happen in the 5th of November?
I think it has the potential to be one of our closest elections, but it's really very difficult to know. There are so many polls, and they're inconsistent. They generally suggest it's going to be very close. But on the macro level, most of the polls suggest that nationally, Kamala Harris will actually win more votes than Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. But in the peculiar elements of the American system, winning more votes around the country doesn't win the election. It depends on the Electoral College, which depends on how many states in the United States the candidate wins. So this election is going to be determined by the outcomes of only 6 or 7 states, so it could be relatively small numbers of people in just those few states, and that's very hard to predict from polls. It depends on their success in getting people out to vote and many things. So people have, there are some people who are very confident who's going to win, but very few.
Very few. Is that so-called swing states? The battle is for the swing states.
The battle is for the swing states. So as an example of that, that's very hard for people from other countries to understand.
Yes.
I live, for example, in Washington, D.C. And if you live in a place like Washington, D.C., or anywhere in the northeast of the United States, frankly, most of the places where for example, Romanians might have friends or relatives, from Vermont to Maine, through the big states like New York, anywhere on the West Coast, from Washington to California, or in the states with big cities like Illinois, like Chicago or Denver, Kamala Harris is going to win all those states. So there's no advertising,
yes.
There's no campaigning. Or on the other hand, in states like in the Deep South or rural states, there's no campaigning because Trump's going to win those states. So it really depends on just places, like Michigan and North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and maybe Nevada and Georgia. Very small number of swing states will determine who the president is.
Can have a very strong point in this election, Barack Obama, for example. I saw his speech last day in the United States. So I think it's a good strategy to bring up these undecided voters for Democratic Party.
That's where all the focus is now. However, it's hard to imagine, given how different Harris and Trump are, that there could be still undecided voters. But there are, and there are enough in those swing states. And that's where they're campaigning, and that's where, for example, someone like Obama is. Places like, again, Michigan and Pennsylvania, where very small numbers. And Obama is still enormously popular.
Okay.
And there is some evidence that the black support, Latino support, for example, for Harris is less than it used to be. So Obama could potentially make a very big difference.
But it's true that the Joe Biden president lost the vote of young people in America. It was a problem here, and maybe Kamala Harris managed to.
Yeah, there's no question that Kamala Harris has created more excitement with young people.
With the young people, yeah.
The fundamental fact is that Joe Biden is an older man, and young people do not understand, did not support, thought he was too old to be president, and it was not as exciting for them as Kamala Harris is. So, again, one of the problems for Harris is young people don't vote as much as older people. So a key strategy for Harris and their ground game, if you will, getting people to vote, calling them, driving them to the polls. A big focus of that is young people.
Okay.
To get them to get, off their chairs and away from their tablets and go to vote.
Are you worried, Elliot, that if Kamala Harris will be elected, we will not have a peaceful transition in the United States? I mean, this is a big question for everybody, even in Europe.
It's a terrifying prospect for everyone in the United States. We saw this at the last election. Who would have ever thought there would have been that kind of violent protests? And even today, it's shocking the number of Americans and the number of politicians who still question the legitimacy of the last election. And also there's a lot of violent rhetoric now in American politics like I've never seen before. So the prospect, if Kamala Harris wins, for there to be violence is real, which is astonishing and horrifying.
We have in Romania the longest border with Ukraine, so everybody is asking, and you are an expert, how Donald Trump will resolve the Russian war against Ukraine in 24 hours. I mean,
Donald Trump thinks so. Even before he's president, if he's elected, he will resolve it. I think it's absurd.
Will not be good news for Ukraine if.
This is a nonpartisan observation.
Of course.
But clearly, given what Trump has said and his bravado about his relationship with Mr. Putin, I would expect that there would be enormous pressure brought to Ukraine for concessions that it otherwise would not make. So I think for those who are extraordinarily concerned about that war and support Ukraine in its heroic efforts, that prospect would be a worrying prospect.
But Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, they both have the same vision regarding China, for example? I mean, Ukraine is
hard to generalize.
It's hard to generalize?
It's hard to generalize, but yes, for Donald Trump, at least China is often depicted as the source of many, many problems.
Okay.
Although not Russia. But clearly but you also have to understand, as you certainly do, that especially with foreign policy, it's not, the president has enormous influence.
Yes.
But for many things, it also requires
Congress.
And one has to remember, even if there's a Republican Senate, as there is likely to be, if you look at where the races are for the Senate, there is still a lot of support for Ukraine among Republicans in the Senate. So it's not a foregone conclusion what will happen.
My last question, if we will have a Republican administration next year, how do you see the relation between United States and Europe?
In Europe?
Yes.
Well, again, you have to understand there is a difference between the traditional Republican Party and Mr. Trump.
Okay.
And clearly, former President Trump's rhetoric is critical of NATO, suspicious of alliances, is a traditional America First attitude, but that's very new to the Republican Party. The party, Reagan to Bush.
Of course.
Very supportive of NATO, very supportive of Europe, and I think much of the Republican Party office holders still feel that way. So I think you will see some counterbalance to Trump's own intentions. And again, it wasn't that Trump opposed NATO per se, as part of his argument was that the European countries weren't paying their share.
Yes.
And indeed, as a result of that, they are paying more. So, we'll just have to wait and see.
Thank you, Elliot. This was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure
Thank
talking
you.
to you.